The emergency room doors burst open as paramedics raced inside, pushing a gurney bearing a heavily pregnant woman. Chaos erupted instantly. Her neck was a mess of savage tears, blood soaking her clothes, a horrific wound doctors quickly blamed on some wild animal attack on the streets. Before the medical team could even begin to fully stabilize her critical condition, powerful contractions ripped through her body. Panic surged, they had no choice. The team scrambled into action, performing a frantic emergency C-section right there in the ER. Amidst the turmoil, a healthy baby boy entered the world, crying loudly, while his grievously injured mother fought desperately for her life against the unseen infection spreading from her wounds. Years dissolved. A young couple eager for excitement arrived at a nondescript building expecting an underground party. Stepping inside, they were hit by a wave of freezing air. This wasn't a nightclub, it was a massive industrial freezer, its ceiling lined with rows of hanging animal carcasses dripping onto the floor below. A stern security guard blocked a far door until, impulsively, the young woman grabbed her date and kissed him with sudden, intense passion. Only then did the guard step aside, allowing them passage. Deafening music pounded against the cold metal walls as they entered the main hall. Strobe lights flashed, neon pulsed, and the boy quickly lost sight of his partner in the writhing crowd. When he finally spotted her, a nearby dancer shoved him hard, knocking him off balance. Confusion hit. Strangers all around stared with unnaturally sharp, unfriendly eyes. Something cold and wet dripped onto his hand from above. He looked up. In an instant, overhead sprinklers activated, drenching the dance floor. But this wasn't water, it was thick, dark blood. Partygoers erupted in ecstatic cheers, throwing their arms wide to welcome the crimson rain. Terror seized the boy. He stumbled, slipping on the suddenly sticky floor as maniacal laughter merged with the pounding music into a waking nightmare. He tried crawling towards the exit, only to be kicked and shoved by the ecstatic, blood-soaked crowd reveling in the downpour. Suddenly, his hands met a heavy boot. He looked up, trembling, into the face of a dark figure wearing sunglasses despite the gloom. Blade. The blood rain abruptly stopped. The revelers hesitated, sensing the dangerous shift in the air. Then the slaughter began. Blade moved with terrifying, deadly precision. His shotgun boomed, his submachine gun chattered, wooden stakes flew from his hands, tearing through the panicked vampires as they scattered. Security guards rushed him, but they stood no chance against his fury. A last desperate cluster of bloodsuckers tried to hold him off. Blade switched fluidly to his sword, slicing them down one by one with brutal efficiency. Only the vampire leader remained. The hunter pinned him to the wall with silver stakes through his limbs, then calmly set him ablaze with a flick of his lighter. By the time police sirens wailed outside, all that remained was a burning corpse and one traumatized human survivor, trembling violently on the blood-slicked floor. Blade had already vanished into the night. The charred vampire body was taken to the hospital morgue for examination. Doctors, unaware of the danger, began the autopsy. As one male orderly leaned in, the corpse suddenly twitched violently, then rose with a snarl, attacking him first before lunging for the female doctor who had come to study the strange blood sample. She tried to run, but the creature was too fast. His fangs sank deep into her neck. The hallway erupted with movement as Blade appeared seemingly from nowhere, his sword flashing in a clean strike that severed the vampire's arm. Snarling, the maimed creature leaped through a nearby window and vanished. Blade turned to the bitten doctor, raising his weapon to end her suffering before the change could claim her. But a memory flashed. His own mother, that pregnant woman from years ago, attacked just like this. She had been the first victim. He lowered his weapon. Instead of killing the woman, Dr. Karen Johnson, he grabbed her unconscious form and carried her into the night, fleeing into the shadows as police bullets chased them. They reached a hidden safe house where Blade's grizzled mentor, Abraham Whistler, waited. The old hunter studied Karen's wound grimly, warning Blade she might soon turn into one of the creatures they hunted. Blade stared at the frightened woman, unable to finish her. Whistler stepped in, noticing her name badge. He explained there might still be a chance to slow the transformation using a brutal injection of concentrated garlic extract, a compound that burned like fire in the veins but could halt a vampire infection. Karen writhed in agony as the excruciating treatment began. Far from the safe house, the secretive council of elder vampires gathered in a somber chamber. They whispered about the disaster at the bloodbath party. Their leader declared the culprit, Blade, the infamous Daywalker, a half-breed abomination who hunted his own kind. The elders summoned Deacon Frost, a young, ambitious, and dangerously reckless leader of a lesser vampire house. Frost, too, was a half-blood, but turned rather than born, carrying the stigma of it. The council blamed him for drawing Blade's attention and endangering their centuries-old secrecy. They insisted vampires must remain hidden in the shadows. Frost, however, radiated defiance. He dreamed not of hiding but of conquest, a world ruled by vampires with humanity enslaved or converted. He left the meeting promising that change was coming. Back at the safe house, Blade visited a trusted, eccentric weapons dealer, stocking up on fresh garlic essence and a higher dose of his own agonizing serum, an injection that suppressed his relentless vampire thirst. Meanwhile, Karen regained consciousness, still human. Exploring the cluttered room, she noticed Blade's unique sword. Reaching for it cautiously, she recoiled in shock as hidden spikes snapped out instantly, punishing any unauthorized touch. Blade returned as Whistler pored over Karen's medical notes, suspecting she was close to uncovering something significant about vampire biology. Their tense conversation unfolded while Blade injected himself with the stronger serum, his body rigid against the wave of agony. Karen listened secretly from another room, but the hunters soon confronted her. Realizing they could no longer shield her from the truth, they revealed who they were and what they did: nomadic hunters tracking and destroying vampire nests city to city. Karen wanted to deny the impossible, but the memory of the burned corpse that refused to die forced her to accept the horrific reality. Whistler gave her a tour of their formidable arsenal: silver weapons, UV grenades, garlic bombs, and his newest invention, a powerful ultraviolet spotlight capable of reducing vampires to ash. Blade agreed to test it soon. Whistler warned Karen the vampires would remember her face. She would never be safe again. Before releasing her, they armed her with a small canister of garlic spray. As she prepared to leave, Whistler offered grim final advice: if the hunger came, it was better to end her own life than become a monster. Elsewhere, the vampire elder Gitano found Frost trespassing in the restricted archives. The young vampire was using modern computers to scan ancient scrolls, seeking secrets the elders had long guarded. Gitano slapped him across the face, furious that a lowly half-blood dared enter the domain of the noble house Erebus. Frost refused to explain his plans, merely smirking as the elders stormed off. Alone, the computers continued decoding forgotten texts, hinting at the dangerous, apocalyptic path Frost had chosen. Blade dropped Karen off at her apartment building, giving her a final warning to stay alert. On the way up in the elevator, she noticed something odd. Several strangers had identical, intricate tattoos on their necks. When she stepped out, two of them followed briefly before vanishing. Inside her apartment, she barely had time to breathe before a sharp knock came. A police officer stood in the doorway, but his tone was threatening, his eyes unnaturally cold. When he stepped too close, Karen blasted him in the face with her garlic spray. It did nothing. Before panic could paralyze her, Blade stepped into the room. The hunter revealed the truth: this man wasn't a vampire. Not yet. He was a familiar, a human servant hoping to earn the gift of immortality through service. Blade brutally beat the cop down and pointed to the tattoo on his neck, the same symbol Karen saw earlier. It was the mark of Deacon Frost. Downstairs, they opened the trunk of the cop's cruiser and found coolers packed with bags of chilled donor blood. The pieces started falling into place. But just as Blade tightened his grip for interrogation, the familiar broke free. With Karen momentarily holding him back and a crowd gathering nearby, Blade hesitated. The servant escaped into the busy street. After a short, heated argument, Karen made her choice. She climbed into the car beside Blade. She wasn't going back. She knew it was safer with him and insisted she wouldn't stop searching for a cure. Later that night, they spotted the familiar returning to his car. A high-speed chase through the dark city led them straight to an exclusive nightclub entrance guarded by imposing bouncers. This place wasn't just a club, it felt like a crypt. Blade armed Karen with a pistol loaded with silver rounds and walked in like he owned the place. Inside, another gathering pulsed, but the vibe was different: no dancing. Guests sat at tables listening to an intense electronic set performed by a DJ and two Asian singers. Near the bar, Blade spotted the familiar. He pushed violently through the crowd, tackling the man and sending nearby vampire guards flying. A chaotic chase erupted through the kitchen where Blade smashed through equipment and furniture, using the terrified familiar like a battering ram. He demanded answers. Where was the hidden entrance? Once again, the vampires had concealed it within a freezer, seemingly favoring cold, confined spaces. Blade let the familiar go and led Karen into the hidden passage. They rode an elevator down into the archive, the very place where Frost had been decrypting the ancient vampire texts. As they began searching through the data banks, the bloodied familiar stumbled into Frost's opulent penthouse, interrupting a party. Frost, however, remained glued to his computer screen. The final pages of a centuries-old prophecy were almost decoded. On screen, a strange circular structure appeared, marked with arcane symbols and empty spaces meant for individuals bearing specific signs. The details remained cryptic, but the shape screamed ritual, something immensely dangerous. The familiar broke Frost's focus, telling him everything about Blade, about Karen, and how she was used as bait. Frost said nothing for a moment. Then, without warning, he pounced, draining the man dry in seconds and casually tossing the lifeless body into the penthouse pool. Among the guests was Quinn, the same vampire Blade had torched and mutilated earlier, now serving as Frost's second-in-command, his missing hand a stark reminder of their last encounter. Deacon Frost issued his command. He wanted the Daywalker alive. Deep in the vampire archives, Blade and Karen followed a foul stench to its source. Hunched before a glowing monitor sat Pearl, a grotesquely bloated archivist, his folds of pale flesh spilling over his chair. On screen he was explaining the meaning of the decrypted diagram to Frost. It depicted an ancient ritual key to Frost's scheme. When Pearl saw Blade step from the shadows, terror gripped him so completely he let out a panicked groan and fumbled bodily in his chair. He screamed into the camera that the hunter was here to kill him. Frost didn't flinch. He calmly told Pearl to die with some dignity and cut the video feed. Blade and Karen moved in, activating Whistler's powerful ultraviolet spotlight. The intense beam instantly scorched Pearl's skin, crisping it black. His agonized squeals echoed through the vault under the burning light. Finally the archivist talked. He spilled Frost's plan, an ancient ceremony meant to awaken the blood god La Magra. To complete it, Frost needed 12 pureblood vampire elders and something else, something crucial he hadn't yet revealed. Blade seized a data disk from the archive and ordered Karen to watch Pearl. If the creature twitched, she was to fry him again. Moving deeper into the restricted section, Blade found a heavily locked door and decided to blow it open, ignoring Pearl's panicked protests. Karen silenced him with another brutal flash of UV light, leaving him charred but whimpering. The explosion ripped the vault door open, revealing shelves holding original ancient scrolls. But as Blade stepped inside, a young girl sitting innocently on the floor drew his wary attention. He hesitated. In a flash, she attacked, kicking him powerfully across the room and shattering a glass display case. Other vampires poured in, led by Quinn, whose scarred face twisted in triumph. The fight erupted fast and furious. Blade fought valiantly, but luck turned against him. A heavy chain snapped around his neck, yanking him brutally against a stone pillar. Karen was captured too. Quinn strutted forward, proudly showing off his regenerated hand, the very one Blade had severed in the hospital. The vampires crowded around, one daring to grab Blade's sword. The weapon's defensive spikes shot out instantly, severing the thief's hand. The onlookers barely reacted. It would grow back. Quinn savored his victory, driving 2 silver stakes deep into Blade's shoulders, mocking the hunter just as he himself had been humiliated during the bloodbath massacre. The room burst with cruel laughter. Their victory was short-lived. In Blade's ear, a tiny earpiece crackled. Whistler was listening. Moments later, the old man stormed the building. Limping but unstoppable, he unleashed a devastating hail of gunfire, mowing down the vampire guards with ruthless precision. Blade and Karen seized the distraction, breaking free and diving through the gaping hole Whistler's explosives had torn in the wall. The trio raced into a dark service tunnel that fed into the city subway system. As they fled, Whistler tossed a heavy explosive charge back into the archive. The detonation ripped through the chamber just as a subway train thundered past on an adjacent track, its noise momentarily cutting off their escape route. A sharp, flying fragment of debris smashed into Whistler's face, but he pressed on grimly. Blade and Karen leaped onto the tracks, dodging between the roaring trains. In a brutal chase through the echoing darkness, hunters and vampires battled violently amidst the speeding metal behemoths. One by one the creatures fell. Quinn lost another hand, then slammed headfirst into the side of a moving train with bone-crunching force. Blade and Karen grabbed hold of the last car of a speeding train, vanishing into the tunnel's depths as the surviving vampires were left behind in the chaos. Back in the relative safety of the hideout, Blade injected himself with another massive dose of serum, his body shuddering. He explained tersely to Karen that he wasn't a full vampire, but something different, something caught in between, a daywalker. His words were few, but his eyes carried the immense weight of his cursed existence. Later, Whistler continued the story, filling in the tragic pieces. He told Karen he first met Blade when the boy was only 13, feral and feeding on the blood of vagrants. Whistler had nearly killed him, mistaking him for a full vampire until he realized the horrifying truth. Blade's mother had been bitten during the final days of her pregnancy. She died giving birth, and the attack had irrevocably altered her child's genes. The result was a unique half-breed, immune to sunlight and silver, possessing vampire strength and speed, but cursed with an unending blood thirst. The serum only brought him brief, painful moments of relief, and its effectiveness was fading. Whistler's own past was steeped in tragedy. He confided that a vampire, a guest he had foolishly welcomed, had once slaughtered his entire family. That day he swore to hunt the creatures until his dying breath. He warned that something monumental was coming in the vampire world, and all signs pointed to Deacon Frost. When Karen stepped into Blade's sparse room, she said softly she finally understood who he was. Blade answered quietly that she couldn't possibly know everything. He wasn't human. Not really. She tried to convince him otherwise, appealing to his humanity, but he admitted his mission had always been deeply personal. Hunting the specific monster who attacked his mother and made him this way. Meanwhile, at Frost's penthouse, Quinn returned battered and in disgrace. Frost's elegant girlfriend mocked him cruelly, even playfully biting his freshly regenerated stump. Frost himself coldly reminded Quinn that Blade must be captured alive. Soon after, the vampires staged a brutal display of power. At sunrise, a hooded prisoner was dragged to a desolate shoreline. When the bag was ripped off, the captive elders of House Erebus saw the face of Gitano, their old clan leader. Frost, using pliers, ripped the fangs from Gitano's mouth, stripped him naked, and forced him to kneel facing the rising sun. The first rays touched his skin, setting him instantly ablaze. Moments later, his body burst apart, scattering ashes across the wet sand. Hand in hand with his lover, Frost watched the execution like a coronation ceremony. At the next council meeting, Frost arrived holding Gitano's fangs, claiming the vacant seat at the head of the table. He demanded 12 volunteers for a special ritual, the final step towards awakening La Magra and achieving his apocalyptic vision. Back at the hideout, Blade and Whistler studied the spoils salvaged from the archives, a fragment of an original scroll and the stolen data disk. While Whistler promised to decode Frost's full plan, Karen, now fiercely determined, set up her salvaged medical equipment. She had developed a new compound, one that made vampire blood boil violently on contact. A microscopic test ended explosively, shattering the slide. While drawing Blade's blood for further study, Karen learned another devastating truth. Whistler was dying of advanced cancer. Even beneath his tough exterior, the old hunter's time was running out. Later, when Karen examined the slowly healing bite on her neck in a mirror, Whistler found her. He warned she looked pale. If the infection took full hold, she might turn within a day or two. She asked him, voice tight, not to bury her before it was absolutely certain. Blade left to restock his serum. In the bustling city streets, he finally came face to face with Deacon Frost. In broad daylight, Frost finally stepped into the open, his skin coated thickly in white sunscreen. One hand gripped the wrist of a small, terrified Asian girl, his hostage. He approached Blade calmly, almost eagerly, wanting to meet the Daywalker directly. Frost spoke with chilling arrogance, declaring humans were nothing but cattle, trembling before superior hunters like vampires destined to rule. Blade didn't flinch. He recognized the symbols of Frost's ritual and dismissed him as a petty pretender playing with forces beyond his grasp. With a cruel smirk, Frost shoved the terrified girl directly into the path of an oncoming bus. Blade lunged forward with impossible speed, snatching her to safety at the last possible second. The child, mute with terror, bolted into the crowd and vanished. While Blade confronted Frost on the streets, Karen and Whistler continued testing her experimental serum in the hideout. She believed the formula could potentially cure newly turned vampires and maybe even suppress Blade's hunger permanently. But before they could finish, the safe house came under ferocious attack. Vampires swarmed in. Though Karen and Whistler fought bravely, killing several, they were ultimately overwhelmed and captured. When Blade returned, he found the hideout ransacked and deserted. Karen was gone. In the dim light, a blood-soaked sheet covered Whistler, who clung to life just long enough to gasp out a message. He explained Frost had taken Karen and planned to trigger a vampire apocalypse that would erase humanity. The old man finally understood the translation. Blade himself was the key to summoning La Magra, which was why Frost needed him alive. Whistler, coughing blood, begged Blade to end his life before the vampire infection raging in his wounds could turn him. Blade resisted fiercely, anguish twisting his features. But in the end he placed his loaded pistol in Whistler's trembling hand and walked away, head bowed. A single gunshot echoed through the empty warehouse. Blade returned to his room, watching Frost's taunting video invitation summoning him to the towering Edgewood building. Karen, now Frost's captive, faced the vampire leader directly in his penthouse. He toyed with her, hinting Blade must have claimed her already, then offered a false choice, transformation or death. She responded with defiance, insisting she'd survive a bite and cure herself. Frost laughed at her confidence. When she called him tainted, not a true evolution, his calm shattered. He ranted about La Magra, the blood god, and the coming apocalypse no serum could stop. Moments later, the sounds of roaring engines and heavy gunfire shattered the penthouse windows. Blade had arrived. He loaded weapons meticulously. Silver stakes, bullets forged for vampires, syringes filled with Karen's lethal boiling blood serum. The building's lobby erupted into chaos as alarms blared. Frost retreated upwards. Blade fought his way higher, floor by floor, finally facing two elite vampire guards waiting on the top levels. He used one to test Karen's injectable weapon. The effect was horrifyingly instant. One hit and the creature burst apart in a violent spray of gore, leaving only a red mist. The second met the same fate. With the path clear, Blade pushed forward into a stark white hall. At its center, a laptop screen looped intricate diagrams of Frost's plan for summoning La Magra. Then, silently, a mechanical bed slid open from the wall. On it lay a woman Blade never expected to see again. His mother, Vanessa, seemingly alive, healthy, and smiling softly. She explained Frost was the one who bit her years ago and she had been with him ever since. The shocking revelation stunned Blade, leaving him utterly vulnerable. Vampires struck from hidden panels, beating him mercilessly with crackling electric batons until his body went limp. He and Karen were thrown into the back of a truck, chained and battered, as the convoy sped towards the ancient ritual site. During the brutal ride, Karen whispered urgently to the semi-conscious Blade. She might have a cure for vampirism, but warned it would also strip him of all his daywalker powers. At the crumbling temple, prisoners were dragged out and clubbed towards the center of a vast, cavernous underground chamber. The captured Vampire Council members, now Frost's sacrificial pawns, were positioned around the room in a precise circle. Quinn knocked Blade to his knees. The hunter trembled violently, weakened by intense thirst, barely hearing Frost's gloating words. Frost toyed with Blade's confiscated weapons, spinning the sword, examining the syringes. Mistaking the vials of boiling blood serum for Blade's own thirst-suppressing injections, he casually tossed them aside. Karen was hurled into a dark pit beneath the temple floor where a half-feral, blind vampire crawled towards her. In the twisted figure, she recognized her old hospital co-worker, Curtis, now a monstrous shell. He fumbled to speak, but she fought back desperately, smashing him down with a heavy bone before climbing out to search for Blade. Meanwhile, the hunter faced his cage. Blade was locked into a towering, grotesque device designed to drain his blood like a living juicer. His mother closed the chamber door with a soft hiss. She asked for his forgiveness, calling him by his human name Eric, before confessing she had surrendered to the hunger long ago. The ritual began. Around the hall, the 12 vampire elders were placed at designated points. Channels carved into the walls began to fill with Blade's draining blood, connecting to intricate patterns in the stone floor. Sparks of dark, malevolent energy rippled through the ancient temple. By the time Karen reached him and frantically forced the chamber open, the process was far advanced. Blade collapsed to the floor, weak, pale, and barely conscious. Karen made a desperate choice. She told him to drink from her, to take the strength he needed to fight. He refused vehemently, then realized there truly was no other way. The daywalker sank his fangs into her neck. Power surged back into his body like lightning. Above, droplets of Blade's blood, collected from the device, began to fall onto the foreheads of the 12 council members. Frost stepped triumphantly into the center of the ritual circle, lifting his arms as the final, crucial drop landed. Jagged bolts of dark lightning struck through the chamber, and the transformation began. Blade's mother lunged at him, furious he had escaped her sacrifice. The battle for survival erupted violently. Karen fought fiercely to disrupt the ritual, firing a shotgun blast that sent one of Frost's guards plummeting into the abyss. Simultaneously, Blade, now fully powered by Karen's blood, ended his mother's cursed existence with one decisive, sorrowful sword strike. The The sacrificed vampire elders screamed as their skeleton-like spirits ripped free from their desiccating bodies and surged like wraiths into Deacon Frost, completing his transformation into the living vessel of La Magra. Fueled by primal rage, Blade charged across the blood-soaked chamber to face the newborn dark god. His first target was Quinn. The Daywalker took him down with relentless, brutal precision, reclaiming his signature sunglasses in the process. He cut through the remaining vampire guards with savage efficiency. Karen joined the chaos, dousing Frost's lover in concentrated garlic extract. The chemical reaction was so violently exothermic that the vampire's head erupted in a gory explosion. Finally, the hunter confronted the godlike Frost. Their swords clashed in an intense, echoing duel across the cavern. Blade landed a perfect strike, slicing the vampire lord clean in half. But the pieces snapped back together instantly. La Magra's regeneration was unstoppable, mocking the legendary sword. Then Blade remembered the discarded vials. He flung his sword with all his might, skewering the cluster of syringes containing Karen's serum across the room. At first, it seemed like a wild miss until the sword's hidden mechanism snapped open, launching the vials straight into Blade's waiting hands. With impossible speed, he drove multiple injectors deep into Frost's pulsating body. The vampire god convulsed violently, his flesh bubbling and swelling grotesquely as the formula did its catastrophic work. An immense surge of pressure tore through him, and the dark deity exploded in an apocalyptic shower of blood, gore, and ash. The ritual chamber fell into stunned silence. Blade and Karen escaped to the temple rooftop, watching the city lights burn against the deep night. She vowed to keep working on a cure for vampirism. Blade, however, refused the idea of peace. He asked only for more serum to keep the relentless thirst at bay, his war eternal. In the final scene, snow fell softly on a Moscow street. The Daywalker appeared, confronting another vampire emerging from the shadows. His war was far from over.